895 feet. This is the number that no one in Las Vegas, Phoenix, or Los Angeles ever wants to say out loud. It is more than a simple measurement on a concrete wall. It is a threshold of disaster. At 895 feet, Lake Mead hits what engineers grimly call Deadpool. Beyond this point, the reservoir stops obeying the rules of physics. Water can no longer flow through the Hoover Dam on its own. At Deadpool, electricity generation ceases. At Deadpool, no water reaches the downstream rivers. At Deadpool, the vital supply sustaining 25 million people across 7 states teeters on the brink of total shutdown. In July of the year 2022, the water level in the lake dropped to roughly 1,040 feet. That was a milestone of the darkest variety. It was the absolute lowest the water had been since the lake was first filled back in the 1930s. At that moment, the American Southwest was sitting closer to Deadpool than at any prior point in the dam's entire 90-year lifespan. Now, if you look at the news today, you might be tempted to believe the worst has passed. The water has come back up a bit since that terrifying low. We had a season of good, heavy snowpack up in the Rocky Mountains, and that runoff pushed the lake levels up. If you only look at the surface of the water, if you only read the cheerful headlines, you might genuinely think the crisis is over. News anchors smiled. Social media posts went viral showing the water creeping back up, and a collective sigh of relief washed over the region. But the underlying math beneath that temporary rise has not changed one single bit. And it is the math, not the weather, that should genuinely terrify you. If you drive out from the neon glow of Las Vegas, heading down Highway 93, and you pull over to look down into the massive expanse of Black Canyon, the very first thing your eyes will inevitably be drawn to is a stark, blindingly white line. It runs horizontally along both towering walls of the canyon, stretching endlessly from one end of Lake Mead to the other. It is the infamous bathtub ring. This ring is made of mineral stains, the chalk-white remnants left behind as the water slowly, agonizingly pulled away over the years. It has left a scar across miles and miles of dark, ancient canyon rock. To comprehend the sheer scale of this scar, you have to understand that this white ring rises taller than a 10-story building. It is so massive that you can clearly see it from photographs taken in outer space. On a clear day, you can stand on the Las Vegas Strip and see it glaring back at you in the distance. It is, in all likelihood, the single largest physical mark left by a water crisis anywhere on the face of the Earth. And it has been steadily growing foot by foot for more than 20 years. When Lake Mead is at what engineers call full pool, it holds roughly 26 million acre-feet of water. An acre-foot is a specific measurement used by water managers. It equals roughly 326,000 gallons. To put that into human terms, one single acre-foot is roughly enough water to keep 2 average American homes running for an entire year. A completely full Lake Mead sits at a majestic height of 1,221 feet above sea level. Today, however, even after the blessing of 2 decent snow seasons in the mountains, the lake sits stagnant somewhere around 1,070 to 1,080 feet. That means the water is still roughly 140 feet below where it was designed to be. The reservoir is barely more than a quarter full. This is a massive, sprawling man-made lake that was originally engineered to hold 9 entire years of the Colorado River's flow, and today it holds closer to 2. Here's where the real digging into this crisis must begin, because we have to stop calling this a drought story. A drought implies a temporary condition. A drought means something that comes, dries out the land for a while, and then inevitably goes away when the rain eventually returns. What is happening on the Colorado River is not a weather event. It is a math story, and the terrifying truth is that the math has been fundamentally, fatally wrong for more than 100 years. To trace the origins of this disaster, you have to travel back to November of 1922. Leaders from 7 western states gathered in Santa Fe to sign the Colorado River Compact, orchestrated by Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover. They aimed to divide the river's water among Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. Relying on recent flow records, they allocated 16.5 million acre-feet annually. This included 7.5 million each for the upper and lower basins, plus 1.5 million later promised to Mexico. On paper, it sounded like a rational foundation for the American West, but the flow data they relied on came from an exceptionally wet stretch of time. This rare historical cluster of high-water years made the river look far more steady than it was in reality. These men built a massive economic system and an entire civilization on what ultimately turned out to be a hydrological fluke. We know this now because UCLA researchers have studied 1,000 years of tree ring data. That ancient wood reveals a darker truth. The river's long-term average is only 12 to 13 million acre-feet, meaning the compact promised 30% more water than the river reliably carries. Scientists at the time warned that the numbers were suspiciously high, but political momentum was too powerful to stop the deal. They ignored the warnings, signed the compact, and built a way of life on a phantom river. From the very first day, 7 states were eagerly splitting up millions of gallons of water that simply did not exist. For many decades, this mathematical original sin did not seem to matter. It did not matter because of Lake Mead and its sister reservoir, Lake Powell, which together represent the 2 biggest man-made lakes in the entire country. These 2 massive basins had enough stored water to easily cover the gap. You have to think of these giant lakes as a regional savings account. For generations, the states were actively spending more water than the river was actually bringing in each year. But the savings account had been heavily built up during those flush, artificially wet early years of the 20th century. There was a massive, deep cushion of liquid capital. But today, that cushion is almost entirely gone. And as anyone with a bank account knows, once your savings account hits zero, every single shortfall, every single overdrawn penny shows up as an immediate crisis. But the situation is actually much worse than just a century-old overpromise, because that accounting error is only half of the problem. The other half of the problem is a relentless, punishing mega-drought. That same team of UCLA researchers studying the tree rings found that the drought currently gripping the Colorado River Basin is the absolute worst dry spell the region has seen in at least 1,200 years. We are not just talking about the driest single year on record. We are talking about the driest, long-term stretch of time imaginable. To find a period of desolation this profound, you have to look back through the annals of human history. You have to go back further than the founding of Oxford University. You have to go back further than the signing of the Magna Carta. You have to look back further than the Norman attack on England. You literally have to go all the way back to the 800s to find a dry spell this extraordinarily long and this deeply harsh in the American Southwest. So when you combine the 2 factors, the reality is staggering. You have a river that was fatally overpromised from the very start, and that same river is now struggling to flow through the worst dry stretch in over 1,000 years. And sitting squarely on top of this collapsing foundation are 25 million people who have built their sprawling cities, their intricate water systems, their massive agricultural farms, and their entire modern way of life. This is why looking at recent weather can be so deceptive. The picture is hard to read because the last 2 years brought decent snow to the mountains. In 2023, heavy snowpack gave the Colorado River Basin a desperate boost, raising Lake Mead 40 feet from its 2022 low. Headlines cheered a triumphant comeback, and social media showed water creeping back up the bathtub ring. But context matters. A 30-foot rise in a lake that is still 140 feet too low is not a comeback. It is merely a pause. The structural deficit remains completely untouched. The gap between what states take and what the river provides is nearly 4 million acre-feet every year. Even with spectacular snow, more water leaves the system than enters it. It is like a bank account where you earn $12,000 but spend $16,000. A $3,000 bonus feels great, but you are still spending more than you earn. You are still going broke, just a little slower. The Colorado River has run this exact deficit for 20 years, and the debt only grows. As this mathematical certainty tightens its grip, we have to look at what is physically happening to the Hoover Dam itself, more than a concrete wall. It is a vital power plant that requires pressure to operate. Finished in 1935, it was once the largest concrete structure on Earth, containing enough material to pave a highway from San Francisco to New York. 5,000 workers labored through 120-degree heat during the Great Depression, and 96 died in the process. It was, and is, a towering symbol of what the American people could build when they chose to literally reshape the land itself. But all of that majestic engineering relies on a principle called hydraulic head. The dam generates electricity based on the height gap between the lake surface and the turbines at the base. gravity pulls water down vertical pipes to slam into turbine blades. The higher the lake level, the harder the water hits, and the more electricity the turbines produce. At full pool, the dam generates over 2,000 megawatts, powering 1.3 million homes across Nevada, Arizona, and California. For decades, that steady power served as a vital backbone for the entire Southwest power grid. But as Lake Mead slowly dropped foot by foot over the last 20 years, so did the power output. Every single foot of lost lake height directly cuts the gravitational force driving those turbines. By the time the lake hit that terrifying 2022 low, the power output of the mighty Hoover Dam had plummeted by roughly 25 to 40%. The situation became so dire that the Federal Bureau of Reclamation had to rush in and install emergency low-water turbines. These were smaller, heavily modified units specifically built to somehow keep working with vastly reduced water pressure just to keep the legendary dam producing any electricity at all. An architectural wonder of the world, built to be one of the most productive and powerful plants in the entire country, was tragically reduced to running on emergency backup gear. And the loss of electricity is really only one piece of the unfolding nightmare. The original water intake pipes that were built to feed the sprawling metropolis of Las Vegas were designed and positioned for a lake that safely stays above 1,000 feet in elevation. As the dropping water surface agonizingly crept toward that critical line, engineers faced a very real, very terrifying chance that the massive city intakes would soon start pulling in empty air instead of drinking water. For a major metropolitan city of 2.2 million people, a city that draws roughly 90% of its entire drinking water supply straight from Lake Mead, pulling air is not just a frustrating municipal planning problem. That is an immediate, catastrophic survival problem. There was one person who saw this precise nightmare coming years before anyone else in power took it seriously. Pat Mulroy, who ran the Southern Nevada Water Authority for over 2 decades, was a lonely warning voice. She watched lake levels drop and warned that Las Vegas was driving toward a cliff. Critics called her an alarmist, but Mulroy built a massive fix known as the third straw. This $1.4 billion intake tunnel sits 860 feet deep, far below the original intakes. By 2022, that multi-billion-dollar third straw was the only reason the city of Las Vegas still had any water flowing out of its taps. But the tragic reality of the third straw is that it does not fix the broken river. It only allows Las Vegas to survive while the rest of the basin suffers without a backup plan. In Pinal County, Arizona, farming families have watched their livelihoods vanish. The Central Arizona Project Canal carries water 336 miles across the desert, serving as a man-made concrete river forcefully running through a landscape of cactus and dry sand. When the federal government finally declared an official water shortage on the river in 2022, Pinal County farmers were among the first to lose access. Because they held low-ranked water rights, lush fields of cotton and alfalfa went dry overnight. Local farmer Will Theander was forced to dry out over 1,000 acres of productive land. Now, families watch their historic water rights turn into promises that a dying river can absolutely no longer back up. It is not just the commercial farmers who are suffering. The Action Indian community also saw their vital water deliveries cut, despite decades of legal battles to secure their rights. For a community that did nothing to cause this shortage, watching their hard-won access dry up carries a heavy weight. It is another broken promise stacked on top of a very long, very dark history of broken promises. And as the water pulled back, the physical environment of the lake itself began to reveal dark, forgotten secrets. Receding waters at Lake Mead uncovered things hidden for decades, including a rusted barrel with human remains found in May 2022. Detectives believe these victims date back to the 1970s or 80s, likely the result of mob murders. These grim secrets sat undisturbed on the bottom for half a century, staying there until the relentless drought finally pulled the water away. Right around that exact same time, history of a different kind emerged from the deep. A World War II-era Higgins landing craft, the same iconic boat used on D-Day, rose from the mud after sinking 80 years ago. Sunken boats, rotting docks, and the original canyon floor are reappearing like a drowned world rising to the surface. These finds spark headlines screaming a singular truth. The water is lower than ever, and it just keeps showing us the ghosts it used to hide. But, even with all of this incredible devastation, the loss of power, the dry farms, and the skeletons in barrels, this is really only the localized picture. The continental alarm lies in Lake Powell, the country's second-largest man-made lake, tasked with holding the river behind the Glen Canyon Dam. Powell is following the same doomed path as Mead, steadily down, down, down. In 2022, the water levels in Lake Powell dropped so terrifyingly low that the government took unprecedented action. They initiated emergency releases from Flaming Gorge in Wyoming to keep Powell above its minimum power level. With both major lakes in crisis, the federal government was essentially bailing water, moving liquid from one massively sinking ship directly to another. If you zoom out even one more step from the reservoirs, you see the true scale of the vulnerability. This river feeds an agricultural food chain touching every state in the country. Southern California's Imperial Valley uses this water to grow 2/3 of America's winter vegetables. A water cut there triggers a nationwide food price crisis from Georgia to Maine. It is a countrywide weak spot dressed up to look like a localized water fight. And amidst all of this domestic chaos, there is one more vital seat at the table. Mexico holds a 1944 treaty guarantee for 1.5 million acre-feet of water annually, while American states fight in court. An entire nation holds a legal claim that cannot just be casually thrown out the window. All of this complicated history, all of this mathematical impossibility, brings us hurtling toward a massive, unavoidable deadline coming incredibly fast. Current rules for sharing the river expire in 2026, forcing a brutal battle for new, permanent agreements. Upper basin states are now fiercely guarding their shares, refusing to be punished because the lower basin has been recklessly overusing their share for decades. The lower basin states, predictably, see the entire crisis very differently. California, Arizona, and Nevada hold the massive populations and political weight. California uses more water than any other state in the pact, while Arizona has already taken painful cuts to its supply. Nevada has spent billions on technology to recycle nearly every drop of indoor wastewater back into the system. Each state can present a perfectly logical point in a courtroom, but the tragedy is that the river itself does not care about human arguments. It carries 12 to 13 million acre-feet in an average year, yet the states are legally owed 16.5 million. No political deal signed in a boardroom will magically change the physical amount of snow that falls in the Rockies, or force the river to carry more water than it naturally holds. And there is one final, devastating visual fact that highlights the craziness of this situation better than any statistic. The mighty Colorado River, which carved the Grand Canyon over 6 million years, no longer even possesses the strength to reach the ocean. For most of the last 25 years, the exhausted river has simply dried up in the Sonoran Desert, miles before it would reach the Sea of Cortez. What was once 2 million acres of lush wetland is now mostly dry mud and salt flats. The indigenous Cocopah people, the river people, have watched the river that shaped their culture turn into a pathetic trickle. In 2014, a brief pulse flow allowed the river to touch the sea for the first time in years, but it went dry again once the flow was shut off. A river strong enough to carve a canyon a mile deep cannot even muster the strength to finish its own natural trip to the sea. So, where does this grim reality ultimately leave the mighty Hoover Dam? The structure itself will stand for centuries, built to outlast the country that created it. But a towering dam without water is just a silent landmark, not a vital engine people can depend on to survive. Right now, Lake Mead sits 140 feet below its designed level. Power output is weaker. Municipal intakes have been rebuilt at the bottom, and downstream farms are slowly dying. A few snowy winters can temporarily slow the drop, but they cannot undo a mathematical gap that has grown since 1922. The 25 million people who depend on this shrinking lifeline are no longer just waiting for rain. They are waiting for 7 state governments to agree on who gets to have less, and so far, no one has willingly stepped up first. Pat Mulroy stated the truth plainly. The question was never whether the river would run short, but when it would happen, and if anyone with power would act before it was too late. Today, the river is still barely flowing and the dam is still standing. But Lake Mead remains trapped 140 feet below full. And that haunting, chalk-white ring on the canyon walls just keeps climbing, moving closer and closer to 895,